welcome to Who Writers Read. This is our second event. I'm one of your hosts, Ginger Eager.
And I'm your other host, Jodie Forrester. Thanks so much for joining us. Who Writers Read is a monthly literary salon featuring writers in a conversation about their reading life, the books that have influenced their work, and the books they go to for inspiration. Ginger and I are both writers who love talking about books, and we began this series being very curious about what other authors are reading. Our guests today are memoirist Emily Rapp, whose latest book is Frida Kahlo and My Left Foot, in which she explores how the experiences, art, and disabilities of Frida Kahlo shaped Black's own life as a fierce feminist artist with a disability. Our other guest is the award-winning Irish poet essayist Doireann Ghríofa. Her most recent work, and her first work of prose, is A Ghost in the Throat, a story of self-discovery as she explores the life of 18th century poet Eileen Dubh Ní Chonaill.
So today's event was pre-recorded in recognition of time differences. I'm going to read you the bios of each of the authors who are on the show today, and then we'll click into the pre-recorded event. And at the end, we'll come out and Jodie and I will tell you goodbye and tell you what's coming up next. So the first person who will be reading today is Emily Rapp. She's going to be reading from Frida Kahlo and My Left Leg, as Jodie said. Here's her bio. Emily Rapp is the author of Poster Child, a memoir, The Still Point of the Turning World, which was a New York Times bestseller and an editor's pick, and Sanctuary. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including Vogue, the New York Times, Time, the Wall Street Journal, the Oprah Magazine, and the Los Angeles Times. She is a regular contributor to the New York Times Book Review and the Boston Globe. Rapp is an associate professor of creative writing at the University of California, Riverside, where she also teaches medical narratives in the School of Medicine. And our second reader will be Doireann Ghríofa. Doireann Ghríofa is an Irish poet and essayist. She is the author of 6 critically acclaimed books of poetry, each a deepening exploration of birth, death, desire, and domesticity. She's won awards internationally, including a Lannan Literary Fellowship, the Ostana Prize, a Seamus Heaney Fellowship, and the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature, among others. The book that she's going to be reading from and discussing with us today is A Ghost in the Throat, which Jodie's holding, her first book of prose, as Jodie said. And it has won the Ann Post-Irish Book of the Year for 2020 and the Guardian Best Book of 2020. All right, so we get started. See.
Thank you for that. I always want to kind of crawl under a rock when my bio is being read, but I'm going to get over it. Congratulations, Darren. That's amazing and well-deserved. Those 2 big prizes, yay. So I'm going to read from just the prologue of Frida Kahlo and My Left Leg, and it starts with an epigraph from Ludwig Wittgenstein, which is, what you say in a body, you can say nothing outside of this body. Desnudo de Frida Kahlo, a lithograph by Diego Rivera, hangs in a light-filled gallery in a small museum in Guanajuato, Mexico. In this portrait, Frida's torso is taut and slim. The sides of her waist curve inward, creating perfect hollows for each of your hands. Her breasts are soft and firm, slightly lifted because her arms are clasped behind her head. Her elbows are the pointed tips of wings. The likeness is that observant, that meticulous and loving in its detail. This body is deeply known, fully seen, and so elevated that you can imagine it moving into positions outside the frame, in real time and in other places. 2 looped strands of large dark beads hang just below her collarbone. Her shoulders look solid, strong, able. This is a body that is loved, admired, desired. Frida's eyes are cast downward, half shuttered as if she's in mid-thought. Perhaps she is enjoying her body and this adoration it evokes from her love. This extraordinary body, this remarkable image, beautiful, when she had already weathered so much. This lithograph was made in 1930. After polio disfigured Frida's right foot in 1913 when she was 6 years old, after the 1925 streetcar accident that broke her spinal column, her collarbone, her ribs, her pelvis, created 11 fractures in her already weakened leg, crushed her foot, and left her shoulder permanently out of joint. During the 29 years between her accident and her death in 1954, Frida had 32 operations, was required to wear a corset every day from 1944 onward, and had her leg amputated as a result of gangrene in 1953. It was this final operation that likely led to the complications that eventually killed her. Speculation of suicide remains. As an artist, Frida is famous for translating her pain into art, but people rarely know the full details of what she endured and what such an enterprise of translation might require. Many of her millions of admirers across the globe do not realize that she was an amputee during that last part of her life, and that all her life, her body was a canvas constantly shifting. At one point, she was hung upside down to strengthen her spinal column. Her body was wired and rewired, bracketed and captured, and restrained and corseted in an attempt to be hemmed in, to stop her muscles and bones and joints from collapsing into chaos. She was as familiar with the edge of a scalpel as she was with the tip of a paintbrush. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Emily, this book is truly, of course, it's so, such a I mean, you bring us right in the first few words and hold on to us tight throughout the entire, from page 1 to the last page. I'm so in awe of you, for both your compassion, your sensitivity, and your realistic rendering of a person's life that we learn you hold such identification with. Mm-hmm. And yet there's still boundaries that make it so much clearer to the reader what the narrative is.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. I'm so delighted to be here with you, and especially to get a chance to meet Emily, whose work, my gosh, like it's years now I've been reading her work and admiring it so much, and I was giddy at the thoughts even to be able to take part in this amazing conversation with both of you, and with Emily as well. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning of A Ghost in the Throat, so there's no spoilers, you needn't worry about that. And I suppose I'd say, just to preface it, that this book, as you've mentioned, is kind of an adventure story in which a character who looks an awful lot like me sets out in search of a poet who lived hundreds of years before her. When we first met, I was a child, and she had been dead for centuries. Look, I am 11, a girl who is terrible at sums and at sports, a girl given to staring out windows, a girl whose only real gift lies in daydreaming. The teacher snaps my name, startling me back to the flimsy prefab. Her voice makes it a fine day in 1773 and sets English soldiers crouching in ambush. I add ditch water to drench their knees. Their muskets point towards a young man who is tumbling from his saddle now in slow, slow motion. A woman rides in to kneel over him, her voice rising in an antique formula of breath and syllable the teacher calls a queena, a keen, to lament the dead. Her voice generates an echo strong enough to reach a girl in the distance with dark hair and bitten nails. Me. By the time I find her again, I only half remember our first meeting. My earliest years of motherhood, in all their fatigue and awe and fretfulness, took place in various rented rooms of the inner city. Our taps always dripped. There were often rats in the yard, and the night city's glimmering made stars invisible. But when I woke to feed my first son, and then my second, I could split the curtains and see the moon between the spires. In those city rooms, I wrote a poem. I wrote another. I wrote a book. If the poems that came to me on those nights might be considered love poems, and they were in love with rain and alpine flowers, with the strange vocabularies of a pregnant body, with clouds and with grandmothers. The city had lit something in me, something that pulsed, vulnerable as a fontanelle, something that trembled as I did, between bliss and exhaustion. We had already moved house twice in 3 years, and still the headlines reported that rents were increasing. Our landlords always saw opportunity in such bulletins, and who could blame them? Me. I blamed them every time we were evicted with a shrug. In a nearby town with lower rents, we signed a lease, then packed our car and left the city. I didn't want to go. I drove slow, my elbow wedged between our old TV and a bin bag of teddies, straining to change gear along unfamiliar roads, scanning signs for Bishopstown and Bandon, for Macroom and Blarney, until my eye tripped over a sign for Kilcrea. Kilcrea, Kilcrea. The word vexed me for days as I unpacked books and coats and baby monitors, spoons and towels and tangled phone chargers, until finally I remembered, yes, in that old poem from school, wasn't Kilcrea the name of the graveyard where the poet buried her lover? Yay.
Thank you so much for that. It's a wonderful, similar to Emily's, a wonderful launch into an amazing world that I was so unfamiliar to me, and I'm sure to many of your readers, and yet so enlightening. So every so often I read a book that I feel like, had I not read that, my life without my even knowing that would have been more without. That's how rich and how meaningful your words are to me.
Thank you, Jodie. I was really struck by, actually, as I was reading Emily's book, how much our books share in strange kind of oblique ways, like not in overt ways, but that there's this sense of reaching towards a work of literature, of art, or in Emily's case, a whole oeuvre of an artist, and that sense of deep connection that's there, and the sense of almost the writer trying to explain that to themselves as much as they're explaining it to the reader, that sense of curiosity, and where that beautiful fascination that we sometimes develop with distinct works of art and literature, and where that leads us, you know, when and how that can deepen our understanding of the works in question. And I was just transported by Emily's book in the best way, you know, and I loved it.
Well, I loved your book. I mean, I think I had a PDF of it that I read first and like copied it and like sent it, like my mom sending me newspaper clippings. I like sent it to my friends. They're like, thanks. And they're like, this is amazing. And then I ordered actual copies when I could. But yeah, I mean, I think it's this idea of, you know, connection across time and history with people, especially women who have made art or, you know, written poetry or whatever, because it's hard to be a woman and to make art. And I think there's a price to pay, a particular price to pay that is unique in some ways to being a woman artist. And I never really understood why I was so taken with Frida Kahlo, and I was actually kind of embarrassed about it. And so I definitely think there are a lot of parallels between our stories in the sense that you kind of fixate on this person and think like, who are they to me and who am I to them? And what does that say about how art perpetuates itself and sort of, you know, holds up the world in this very real way, which sounds like a very epic slightly melodramatic statement. But for me, I feel that in writing this book, it became almost absolutely true to me.
I definitely was struck by that in reading both your works by I'm not sure if this is the right word, but serendipity. Darren, your book, your muse, as it were, I'm not sure if that's the right word either, is the 15th century poet. Emily, Frida Kahlo is early 20th century. You both have relationships that have influenced you tremendously with women in the past. And I was so struck by how we happened to have the two of you together. Of course, this was Emily's impetus to invite you, Darren, but that you both have had such a similar narrative. I'm curious, were there any books in particular that you read that you could look at for inspiration, for guidance, for understanding structure that gave rise to both of these books?
Certainly was for me, but Emily, would you like to answer the question first?
You gotta think. You go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first then. We're doing a good teamwork on this. So it just so happens that this is something I've thought about a lot, because unlike Emily, this was my first book of prose. So I felt quite apprehensive and unsure of myself as I was embarking on it, even though I'd written books of poetry. And I was really almost had the sense like I was walking into a darkened room and feeling around for a light switch. And being a real bookish person, what I was looking for rather than a light switch was a book that could almost show me the way, that could say to me, yes, okay, you want to attempt this kind of like double biography. There are ways you can do this, and that would kind of almost reassure me. Now, the book that succeeded in doing that is so different from the book that I ended up writing, but it felt like a permission-giving book, and it felt like a brave and strange book, and I really admired it. And that sense of admiration, I think, was the fuel that carried me to write my own very different book. And the title of the book is Sweet for Barbara Loden, and it's written by Natalie Leger, but the edition that I have is translated by Natasha Lehrer and Cécile Menon, and it's published by Les Fugitives in Britain, but I know it was published in America as well, I think by the Dorothy Project. I hope I have that right.
Yeah.
So even as I'm holding this up to the screen, which is kind of difficult to see, but there's so many pages I have dog-eared, that I have marked, underlined, I almost annotated the whole thing, and took so much of this book as kind of an exercise in heart, that this was an effort to write about the life of Barbara Loden in a very different way from how I ended up writing about the life of Eileen Duffy Connell. And yet the angle from which it attends to her life was really instructive.
Mm-hmm.
For me in my own efforts subsequently. So I feel like even though it is so different, I feel like I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Natalie Leger for writing this book, and to her translators for bringing it to me in English. I love it.
Oh, it's on my list. It's been on my list for a while. There's like a whole big list of things to read. That's really interesting. Yeah, I think what you're saying too, Darren, about this idea of going into a room and being like, whoa, show me the way. I mean, I think that's actually, for me, that's what books are supposed to do. They're supposed to be the light that you throw down into the hole, and someone's like, whoa, look at this. And they want to come out, it's like a rope you throw down there to help them climb out. And for me, I mean, I have it's very nerdy, and my undergraduates are always like, oh, when they ask me what my favorite books are, and they continue to inspire me. So I don't care. They can think I'm a nerd, but Frankenstein, for example, like this idea of trying to tell the story of a made being that the world rejects. Like that book has stayed with me my whole life. And, I've listened to it on tape, stating myself there. But like I've read it, I just love it. I've seen a ballet about it, which was a little bit odd, but interesting. And I think that to me, it's just like, a permission giving, like to show the ways in which society makes people other than they are, and sort of deconstructs their qualities to the point of destruction, basically, of total destruction. And then the other book, of course, is War and Peace. I know, it's like, boy, but I have a particular attachment to that because my godfather, who's a Russian literature professor, when I was in the hospital, in very similar contraptions to what Frida was in, traction and, upside down, and so these medieval torture devices, he would read to me that book in Russian. I don't speak Russian, so it's like, I have no idea, I don't know what he was saying, but like, I have a kind of body memory of that book, I think. And so, I'd be like, in some kind of weird, like contorted position, and he would just be talking away in Russian, And so those two books for me are real, like, they're cornerstones for me, and they show up everywhere. It's like, so that's, I think I can link it, the Frida Kahlo book, to both of those.
And a bit of the book. But one of the things that I was thinking about when you guys first began speaking was this idea of obsession. And there are, and the idea of permission giving, which you both just mentioned in your answers. And so there are places in each of your books where you wonder if you're projecting your own desires or realities onto these artists who are inspiring you. And I kept thinking of Moby Dick, talk about epic, right? And how it is this story of sort of male obsession. It's a male text, maybe, instead of a female text. And there's this actual thing that he's pursuing. It is metaphorical, but it's also massive, and it's in the water. And you were both pursuing almost these absences, it felt like. There were, the pieces that were missing from Eileen Group's life, and the daily realities of Frida Kahlo being a woman who lives with pain and disability, and how that wasn't mentioned. I just wondered if you guys wanted to speak to that.
I'll take that one. I'll take that ball. I think for me, I mean, a lot of my books, and this is, I don't know what this says about me, probably nothing very good, but I write a lot of my books out of anger, anger that I feel like people are getting it wrong, or that there's no book for me, there's no light in the hole for me, and I am like, what am I going to do? I guess I'll have to write one. With Frida, there's such a strong ableist narrative around her work. Like, she was desperate for Diego's love, and like, that wasn't true. Like, they had a complicated relationship. They had a pretty revolutionary kind of modern relationship. They had lovers of different genders, like whatever. So that wasn't true. And also this idea that pain is that inspires people. And I was just like, that is such an ableist, like, it's such a condescending and untrue narrative. Like, pain is just pain. When you're in pain, you're pain. Like, you're not like, oh, I feel inspired. Like, that's ridiculous. And I felt like everything I read about her wanted to cast her as pathetic, conniving, vain, which she was, and I love, because I am too. And also just like, just the pain made her an artist. It's like total bullshit. So I think a lot of my books have risen from that. This one is in particular risen from this idea that like someone's trying to put a narrative on a person. That person might be me. It might be someone who shares something that I share, and I just don't want it. So I feel like I have to untwist it, and then restitch it.
Frankenstein.
Yeah. Exactly.
Actually, I read an extraordinary essay a few years ago, speaking of Frankenstein, by Darcy Steinke. Is that how you pronounce her surname? Darcy Steinke. I think she's American.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
I read an extraordinary essay a few years ago in Granta, I think, and it was by Darcy Steinke, and it was about Frankenstein, but it was layered over her relationship with her own mother, which I really recommend to anyone who's interested in. Like, it's fascinating to me how Frankenstein has almost tentacles its way outwards into other forms of literature and art, and I love when a work of art or literature has the depth to be able to do that, to be able to offer that kind of engagement in all different kind of strange ways. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess your question about obsession and about obsessiveness, I definitely felt that There was an element of obsession involved in my fascination with Eileen Duffy Connell, and the way it began was just that I was so enamored with this extraordinary poem that she had composed, Queen Arthur, which she spoke over the body of her husband when she found him murdered. And it is such a moving, moving poem, but it's also, I think, testament to her rage and her desire and her grief. It's a very human work of literature, and it's really, really powerful. And the more that I read that poem out loud to myself, the more it seemed to me as though her voice was somehow alive within the poem whenever I spoke it out loud, which I guess is like the case really for any poem that we speak out loud or any book, isn't it? Like that's part of what's so moving about literature, is that it allows us to access some sense of the daydream of an author, whether living or dead. It allows us to daydream the same daydream that they once had, and that's magical.
It is.
So that was how the obsession with Eileen Dove began for me, was with her poem and with her voice. And the more I read and reread the poem, the more I wanted to find out about who she was beyond the poem. I'm extremely nosy, you see. That's what drove me. If I could have found the answers to my nosiness in any book in the library, I would have been happy with that. So in as much as Emily is saying that it's rage that has driven some of her books, and this book in particular, with me, it's just pure nosiness and greed. I wanted more and I couldn't find it, so I had to make it for myself. And that's what a ghost in the throat is.
Emily, I've just been thinking about what you said in terms of pain not being an inspiration, that's just such a fallacy. And absolutely, I remember years ago when I got caught up with Frida Kahlo, God, so many years ago. And I also read those kinds of reviews, and I thought, I have been in pain. And it was just awful, but it wasn't at all inspiring. And it also makes me think of Sanctuary, which is not a book that we're talking about right now, but the previous memoir that Emily wrote is, she touches on people always saying, having lost her leg, having lost her son, before he was 3, how brave, how courageous. Yeah. And she rolls her eyes. And she is so disturbed by that. And I have heard that in terms of things that I've gone through, and I've always thought, I don't feel like I'm any of those things. I'm just doing what I have to do. And the word that Emily understands and uses is basically embraces this resilience. Mm-hmm. And that struck such a chord with me. Doireann, when your baby girl was in ICU, and people were, you've got 3 kids at home, and people are so, how did you get through this? You're so brave. You're so, and Emily having to hear that too, especially about her young son who died so, without really having a kind of life that one wants for their child. It's resilience, isn't it?
Yeah, I think resilience is misunderstood and sort of misrepresented as this kind of brute strength. And I always find it really interesting when people say that, especially to women and especially to moms, like, oh, you're so brave. It's like, actually, women do this all the time. Like, man, that's saying that. Because I just think there's a kind of assumption that, oh, wow, like, I would die if I were you, which is the title of my next book, by the way. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. Maybe you would. But probably you wouldn't, right? So it's like almost there's no way to win. And I do think there's a kind of, to call somebody brave, to call somebody sort of like strong in this very kind of epic sense is a way of distancing yourself from the possibility that bad things could happen to you and you might experience loss and your child might get sick and die. And no one wants to sort of engage with you. So then you're sort of left alone. Kind of, and like, there's a whole thing in this country with, the t-shirts that have messages, which makes me nutballs, but like the hashtag blessed. And it makes me think of like being, someone rocks up in their like Fiat with like a hashtag blessed, and you drive away and you're like crappy 1990 Honda Civic with like a hashtag that says cursed. It's not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling. And it's like the exact opposite of human connection, which is what sustains us through those experiences. So it's like a double whammy. And yeah, if one more person called me brave during that time, I was just going to lose my mind. I was like, I'm not going into war here. Like, I am not a soldier, nor do I want to be fighting some dumb war. But like, I also just want to live my life, which is not an extraordinary desire. That's just a human desire.
Yes. So, one a question that my husband actually brought up is, for writers, whose shoulders are you standing on? Who are your early inspirations? Who was it that, or what books were the ones that, I guess we're going back to the earlier question of what books were in your life growing up?
I was very lucky in that my parents really nurtured my love of reading from a very, very young age. They read to us all the time. They dropped me off at the library all the time. We have a great public library system here in Ireland. It's absolutely spectacular. And that was really what made a reader of me. So, how many hours have you got? I read and read and read. As a girl, I loved it. I loved the fact that it allowed me, in the way that allows anyone who's interested in reading, that it allowed me, maybe the illusion, but felt very real at the time, of tasting someone else's life, tasting a different character's life, of clambering into the window of someone else's house. And I feel like, they say that helps to foster empathy in children. And definitely, I can only speak from my own experience of that. And I know for me as a girl that it really did help me to, as a child would, look or imagine looking through someone else's eyes. And I feel like that is really important. That can be quite tricky for kids sometimes, I think, but books really helped me with that. And I shouldn't probably admit this, but I stole a lot of books that I liked most from my parents' house, and I now read them to my own children all the time. The parents don't know they're gone. The parents don't know. They're completely oblivious to this evil act. But, and again, purely selfish, because I love to read those books out loud.
Yeah.
So it's not just the act of sharing them with my children, it's also the fact that I get to taste all these amazing books again and again for myself as well as for my kids. So yeah, I'm delighted. And they're all quite strange books. The ones that I've stolen. One of them, which had a great impression on me as a kid, it was called Sophie's Hideaway. And it was one that I think one of my aunts moved to America and she sent it home. It was a book that had like 3D pictures, and you could open loads and loads of little doors on a cityscape of New York, and you could see all the people who were in the skyscrapers. Like, for a young girl living in the west of Ireland who had never seen a building taller than 2 stories, it was just beautiful. So yeah, that's one example of a book I loved growing up, and I won't keep you all night by describing it anymore.
That's it. I think I remember that book. I'm gonna have to look it up, because my daughter would love that. She loves all the little hideaway, every kid does. Ooh, you open a door, there's something in there. Ooh, yeah, they love that.
So what say you, Emily, about your earliest experiences with both reading and influences that may have carried over into your writing?
Well, the first book, which is sort of is the Bible. My dad's a Protestant minister. I grew up reading the Bible. I also grew up he would read it in Aramaic, which basically sounds like people shouting at each other. He would say, quote, pass. He doesn't know the whole thing in Aramaic, but he was just like, oh, I'm going to read this Lord's Prayer to you in Aramaic. It's like all this cutting sounds. So that book, but I never, those narratives are problematic in all kinds of ways. but you know, my dad would sometimes let me rewrite them, like, and I would show them to him, and he would look at that, and he'd be like, "Oh, it's interesting," you know, and then whatever. So that was a big influence. And the other would be this series of books, which is that I just bought for my daughter, and called Little House on the Prairie. There are like 6 or 7 of them by Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I love them because it's like, you know, family alone in the woods, and there's a snowstorm. How are they going to survive it? You know, it's very kind of, and I lived in Wyoming in, you know, sort of big sky country. And so I loved those books, and in reading them aloud to my daughter is also really great. I mean, I can sort of picture myself, you know, in the window of my room in sort of Wyoming with the wind constantly blowing and reading those. And here she is in California where it's like blazing hot. And she's like, "Oh, a snowstorm." I'm like, "Yes." So we don't have the long winter in Southern California, but those books were really influential for me, and they're very, they still are in a way, just from the way that I think I envision how community creates story, how story creates community. Those things have become more important to me, particularly in my life as a teacher as well. So
I love the window into each of your young reading lives. You shared it, Emily, when you talked about the snow outside the window in Wyoming. And Doireann, you have the scene in the book, which is so beautiful. You're hiding in the hayloft, you're reading, and then as the seasons or as the winter passes, the hay grows less and less. Ultimately, you knock a tooth out. But yeah, that's a beautiful scene. Not the tooth knocking, but the reading in the hayloft.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you. Actually, there's another book that I wanted to mention to you more when I came into the teenage years, which my mother gave me one year for Christmas, and it's an anthology of poetry, which is called Real Cool. It was published in Ireland only, I think. It was edited by Niall McMonagall, but I'm showing you the cover, and I wish you're listening.
that's awesome.
To see it, because it's just a picture of a guy sitting on a wall with like 18-hole Doc Marten boots, which I loved as a teenager. Oh my God. It almost made poetry seem cool, the fact that this was on the cover.
That is cool. And they're cool now again. I still have mine from the 90s. They're still around.
Well done. I wish I had kept them. I'm going to have to make a new investment. It's a really, really good anthology. And even looking back on it now, I mean, it stands up. She gave it to me when I was 13 or 14. And I mean, when I think of it now, I was reading in this book Adrian Rich and let me see, Evan Boland, Dorothy Parker. It was a really, really interesting. There's loads of Rita Dove poems and this, but there is one that that really kind of reminds me of my fascination with history and in a sense, part of what led to the imaginative act of A Ghost in the Throat, maybe. And it's by a poet called T.E. Hulme. It's called Image, and it's just one line long, this poem, teeny tiny. And it goes like this: old houses were scaffolding once, and workmen whistling.
Oh,
I
that's
loved
great.
that as a teenager. I love the sense of looking at something which seems to you in your teenage eyes like it's always been there, this old house. And this poem in a single line reminds you of all the different layers of time. You know, the fact that everything around you is fluid and in different states of, you know, making their way through time. I love it. I love it so much. And it's just a great lesson in what we're doing when we give books to kids, isn't it? We're really opening the whole world to them.
Mm-hmm. That's a great line. I love that. It's like when I was in Italy this last couple of weeks, I mean, there's so many ruins. I love ruins. I was taking so many pictures. My friends are like, "You're taking pictures of holes in the ground." I'm like, "But they're ruins." I love me a ruin. Like, and it's the same thing. It's like there's life in there that doesn't really even have shape or texture in terms of imagination, but just the idea that it did exist feels significant and singular, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the fact that literature and poetry can allow us like a trapdoor, isn't it? Like a poem like that allows us a trapdoor to imagine this single alternative moment in time where you're not looking at an old house, you're looking at the scaffolding and the workmen whistling, and it's just so perfect. Beautiful.
I love that.
The most amazing thing about being at Runes is that here we are. look at what happened before and to imagine the lives that went before us. The footsteps, we're stepping in the same footsteps of somebody from centuries really ago. It's so humbling. I do want to do you guys have any questions for each other at all, especially in, because this is a literary salon, in terms of books or inspirations or?
I would love if Emily, if she wouldn't mind, if she'd like to tell us a little more about what she's working on at the moment.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. I am, I'm transitioning to fiction because that was my first love, and I'm tired of talking about myself. Although I think with memoir, for me, memoir is about maintaining a kind of privacy, which sounds weird, but is absolutely true. And then my next book, though, is going to be a kind of a combo craft essay book called I Would Die If I Were You, and is because I'm so sick of hearing that. And also it's, I've learned a lot, so much now, having been teaching since I met Jody in 2006, a long time. I've learned a lot about how to teach people, if that's possible, like how to teach people how to engage with their work in a way that makes them feel successful and not stressed out. So it's a kind of a craft book for people who don't want to do exercises.
Oh my gosh, I want it. I want it so much. I feel like I could learn from this. Give it to me now.
And it's a lot of poetry. It's a lot of read poetry and so many, especially fiction writers, are very resistant to that. And I mean, all of my first influences in terms of language were poets, for sure. But how about you, Doireann? What are you working on?
Oh, I'm just noodling away on my little poems that no one will ever read.
That's such a poet thing to say. It's like, I'm just a poet. I'm actually going to send you a book. I'm going to send you a book by a colleague and longtime friend of mine, Katie Ford, that I think you'll really like, called Blood Lyric. And I think you'll really respond to her work. I think you.
What a title! I love that.
Her daughter's in the ICU. She nearly died. She was born at very young, like maybe 21, 2 weeks, just right at the edge of viability. And it's. I mean, she's written 4 books of poetry now, but it's one of my favorites of hers. And I'm going to send it to you. So I'll get your address. And I'll send it to you.
Thank you. Oh, you're so kind. I'm delighted. I look forward to that.
Here we are. I think I enjoyed watching it even more than I enjoyed doing it, since the pressure was off. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our second edition of Who Writers Read. Our next event will be with American novelist, memoirist, and short story writer Pam Houston and American novelist and memoirist Gina Frangello. They will be in conversation on Wednesday, August 25th at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And of course, we hope you'll join us. Today's salon will be added to our archives soon. You can also see our past events on our archives. You can visit our bookshop.org storefront for a list of all the titles that were mentioned on today's event. You can also purchase copies through our bookshop.org storefront and support your local indie bookstore while also helping us cover our production costs. To register for an event, watch an archive, or find our bookshop link, please visit us at www.whowritersread.com. Thanks so much for joining us today. We do normally have questions, but we won't today since it was pre-recorded. Hope to see you next month. Bye, everyone.